All right, so as we start thinking about leadership transitions, it's helpful to take a step back and talk about how your board is structured, what positions you have on your leadership team, and really starting to think about, like, has that worked well? Is that something you want to continue? You know, do you want to shrink it? Do you want to grow your board, bring on new roles, transition some roles? So we've put together a list of potential board positions that, we've seen just from talking to students at different universities. I think sometimes it's helpful to realize that, just because something is the way it is doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And also that almost every chapter has a different subset of board positions and leadership structures. So I sort of want to open this up to you guys and just to hear a little bit more about how you guys structure your board and what works in that way and what you think, maybe you might change for next year.
Happy to start off with RIT. So as a club, we're mandated to have president and treasurer. In addition to that, we also have our vice president who acts as our project manager, and then our event coordinator. Previously, when we were a larger chapter prior to COVID, we had two event coordinators, one for internal events and one for coordinating with conference and other travel, and then also our communications chair.
Nice. Is that something that has worked well and that you plan to keep for next year?
I think so. Honestly, it's been set up that way the entire time that I've been involved over the past 4.5 years, and it's worked well. As I mentioned, the two event coordinator positions has shifted over the years. We also briefly had a co-president last year, due to co-ops, and so not all of our e-board was on campus at that time. So having that additional person who, could meet up with people in person to coordinate was helpful. But I think it really comes down to having really well-defined roles for each position, and to not over or under delegate.
Definitely.
Is the specific roles and responsibility for the different positions, do you have like a document that you explicitly write out the responsibilities for each role, and if so, do you find that throughout the course of a school year, do people kind of really fall into that role that's well defined?
Yes. So we have a constitution that we try to revise each school year, if not every semester, that goes over what each position, what those roles are. And then part of what we do as our transition is we'll have transition meetings with our current e-board and our future e-board and say, hey, here are what your defined responsibilities are. Here's other things that you could be doing, but don't necessarily have to. This is what we've done in the past. This is what we kind of envision for the future, and see how those changes could be made.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's really good to kind of have like a dynamic group or a dynamic listing of positions that you kind of identify needs throughout the school year and adapt each year. So I think that's really great way. Any representative from EMU want to kind of talk about your leadership structure, what works or what you might think about changing?
Sure. So EMU's engineering program this is either its 6th or 7th year. So we have like 40 or 50 students in the program so far. I think technically every student is a member of ESW, but in reality, like I'd say 10 to 15 of them like probably actually do stuff. So at this point, so Riley and I are co-presidents. think there's, so we're new co-presidents. I don't think there's any other leadership structure. I don't think we really need that at this point. I think the biggest thing would be is if we could just get more people involved. And then as more projects happen or the need for fundraising or anything, I think then that could be figured out. But at this point, I think we're all good as is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you have a smaller group, sometimes you don't really need too many positions. But definitely something to think about if, you know, as a way to bring in new people, like you could, you know, if there's somebody who wants to be like VP of recruitment or, you know, membership, so that it's not something that you guys have to do all on your own. I think sometimes with smaller chapters, you even see like almost everyone is in a board position just because that's how the responsibilities sort of divvy out. And it's up to you whether you sort of name that or you don't name that. But, you know, if you're working on a project and somebody's the lead of that, that theoretically can be a board position if you want it to be. But yeah, that's cool to hear.
Yeah, so the next topic that kind of relates to it is how you select your board. So you know, RIT, you might have a process in place. EMU, you know, you might kind of take in this information and whether or not you use it in the next year or so. I think it's still interesting to kind of listen to and kind of think about as your chapter evolves. But Carly, you want to take this slide and just kind of talk about it?
Yeah, sure. I will try to keep my dog from barking.
She does, I
but
think.
yeah.
You can take over.
Okay. She's like napping right now, so I'm just gonna like pet her while I talk and hope that keeps her quiet. But yeah, she just perked her head up when she heard me talking. But yeah, so like there are a couple different ways that you guys can do your like board selection process. You know, some chapters have like a standard election and you kind of like formally like sign up to for the position, like to be put up for election, and then you can have your chapter's votes on who you want to elect. Some of them are like, you know, you're an upperclassman and you have an underclassman that you think would be a really good fit for the role. So you kind of just like reach out to them and be like, hey, I think you'd be great for this role, and see if they'd be interested, or maybe have them shadow you. And just kind of, you know, find what position fits kind of what everybody's strengths and time allow for on the board. Lots of different board structures. We have some that do co-presidents, like you guys mentioned. We have some that do like just one president, and then they have like just a whole list of like different VPs and everything like that. Did Sarah or Molly, did you either of you want to add anything to that?
Yeah.
I think,
Go ahead.
yeah,
ahead, Sarah.
just, you know, thinking about how you transition, and some of the key things are deciding if you have people who are in board positions who are not graduating, if it's sort of assumed that you keep your role, or if you have to sort of, you know, re-win that role, or, you know, reapply for that role. And I think one of the things that our team did was we had elections and we had applications prior to that, where it wasn't like your application would be really approved or rejected, but you sort of had to fill out sort of basic information about you, why you wanted the role, what your plans for the role were, that showed you were serious, and then that was circulated ahead of the elections so that you know, everyone had that information and knew who the people were. I think part of that was that we were a pretty large chapter, and especially with so many projects, we weren't always all meeting all together. So ahead of board elections, it was really nice for, you know, everyone to get to know all the people who were running. But I think sometimes, you know, continuity can be helpful, especially in smaller chapters, or depending on your board structure. So making sure that you decide that in advance and talk with your board about, you know, are the people who are staying on, you know, going to stay on, and then just have elections for open positions, or if you have like a full turnover even if you reapply or get selected into your role. I think it's important to make sure that you have processes in place and have all of that agreed upon and written down in advance to avoid any potential conflict.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is having the process written down, if you have a constitution, or if that's just like a Word doc that gets shared from year to year. But I think it is really important that not only the the officer board agreeing upon it, but I think it's also really important for your general members to understand the process. So if they're interested in joining the leadership board at some point in time, that they are clear in what is expected from them and how to join. I also wanted to kind of give the example of how we selected board members at UT Austin. So we were a larger chapter, so we actually had a leadership board where under the president were 4 VPs of different branches, as we called, and then under that were what we called chair positions. So for example, we would have a VP of finances, and under that we would have a fundraising chair and let's say like a corporate liaison that would reach out to companies for sponsorship. So in that example, we held elections with the general members for the president and the VP roles, and then all of the chair positions under those branches were actually an application-based process. So the general members were involved with those larger positions, and then once that new VP slate was elected, then the outgoing and the incoming VPs and presidents would then review the applications that were submitted for those chair positions. So that's just to give you an example that you can kind of do a hybrid approach if that makes sense for your chapter, and just kind of thinking about how to get people involved. You don't want to oversaturate the number of elections that you're holding in a meeting. That'll just like last forever. So if you have like a larger board member or a larger board structure, maybe that's something to consider to have a variety of selection processes that you use. I also do want to note that your university might have some specific processes that it requires of their organization. So just be aware of that. I would say if you're not already aware of that requirement, like you're probably in the clear, but it is good to kind of consider that. Yeah, so I'll go into kind of general guidelines. It's kind of just a catch-all of some advice that the CRC's put together for you. So the biggest thing is to plan early. Like I said, this is a really good time to start thinking about the process if you don't already have a specific process in place to select your next year's board. So that can just look like, having a meeting with your officer board and saying like, hey, in the next couple months, we want to start having our board transition. So that means we need to elect or select a new board. And so just kind of getting that conversation off the ground is good. So just like I said, discuss with your current board on this past year. Did things work? Did things not work? Have you identified an area where maybe you need an officer to kind of like take over that? You can review the roles and responsibilities like we were talking about, and making sure you have a clear-cut document explaining the roles and responsibilities, especially if you are going to have elections or a selection process. You want people to understand what they might be stepping into. There is no required board structure from an HQ standpoint. This is entirely up to your chapter. We have 2 great examples of a larger chapter here on the call and a smaller chapter. So really kind of identifying what works for your chapter is key. Create a plan for selecting your new board, I would say with your current board or your other officers. So like we were talking about applications, elections, when you want to have those, and planning early is good. So we also want to encourage you to select your board as early as possible, because that'll give you a lot more overlap time to kind of transition all of your knowledge and information from the outgoing board and the incoming. So don't wait till finals. People are stressed. People don't want to even like think about taking on a new role during finals. So You want to do it at a time of year when people are kind of like excited, when they're ready to think about that position. And ideally you would have at least one more officer meeting before the summer starts. So that would be a really great time to kind of have a meeting where both the entire outgoing board is there and the entire incoming board is there. So you can kind of talk about that transition. And then have the new board and old board work together during that meeting to kind of share contacts, documents, goals. I think the next slide, we're going to get into like more nitty gritty about that, but kind of planning transition meetings is really key there. So I'll just give another example from the UT Austin chapter. We had transition meetings. I think RIT, you were kind of talking about this as well, but we would have like meetings where let's say for the fundraising chair position. So we would have a meeting with the outgoing and incoming president and the outgoing and incoming fundraising chair. So you would have 4 people in that meeting, and I think it's really important for the president or the co-presidents to be a part of that meeting as well, because then you kind of get an idea of like what worked well in that position in the past year, what challenges they had, and then as the president or as the main leader, you kind of have a better sense of the position, so you can either support that role, change it, adopt it, do whatever makes sense. And during that meeting, you can also share. So I'll get into what I was just about to say, but schedule these one-on-one meetings and encourage new board members to ask questions and really get into the nitty-gritty while their old or the outgoing position is still present. So that's a great time to get all of their knowledge. So, you can talk about projects, collaborations, if that's like with other orgs on your campus, or if that's community groups that you regularly do events with, your recruitment strategy from year to year to bring on new members, events that you might be that you might have annually, just kind of talking about those things. So another huge tip that we have is to document everything all the time on a shared platform. So this can be Dropbox or Google Drive. I think Google Drive is really like my favorite platform to share documents, because you can put any type of document, and yeah, like document everything. That's cool. You can annotate. So again, you list positions with the expectations and goals for each board member. So everyone, so that's a transparent document that everyone is aware of and familiar with the expectations. Keep meeting minutes. This is really important. So if you have board member or board meetings on a regular basis, it's really good to kind of capture the ideas and planning that you discuss during those meetings. And then and that way, like, incoming officers can kind of read through these minutes and review what's been talked about. Record the contact information of all partners you work with. So if that's companies that regularly sponsor you, if that's a local cleanup org that you always do an event with, or whatever you can think of, make sure you record the contact information, and including your CRCs. That's a really great introduction to make. That'll be something your CRC reaches out to you later this year with. They'll say like, hey, I want to have one last check-in call with you. And that's a really great time to bring the incoming president onto that call so they can make the connection with us, and just to make sure that's a smooth transition from year to year. It's also a really great idea to formally transition these relationships. So for example, these like partnerships I was talking about before, send an email saying, hi, I'm like so grateful to be working with you this year. I am leaving the position, but this is the person that's taking over my role. So it's not just like a cold email from someone, in the fall. It's really good to like make those transitions. Always make sure you manage your passwords and account information. You don't want to have like your chapter Gmail active, and then the president leaves and did not tell anyone what the password is, and you can't get on that anymore. Same with like any social media that you have. Just make sure you document those passwords and account information in a shared place. And then finally, just really making sure that the budget and funding processes are kind of seamless from year to year. So making that a topic of discussion during those transition meetings is really key. Just talking about like, what are your regular annual expenses? What are your annual income? So just making sure that the incoming board is aware of all of those. And then this is a little end of year checklist we have. It's gonna kind of repeat a lot of the information we've talked about in the last couple of slides, but I think this is a good visual checklist of all of these things. So budgeting and funding. So whether that's university or chapter specific, if you work with your student org, you know, office on campus, and they're the ones who kind of hold your money, making sure that you discuss these things and manage any external funding. So grants and corporate sponsorships, like those partnerships I was talking about before. Making sure you have formal e-board transition. So again, we've been talking about this, documenting roles, opening the e-boards to potential members. I don't think we explicitly said this, but that's also a really good way to get people involved. So over the course of like the next month or so, if you have some e-board meetings and you have people that might be interested in joining the e-board, have them like come to a meeting and learn what it's about, or shadow a role that they might be interested in. I think that's a really great way to kind of get underclassmen involved, and just kind of like creating that new slate of members who are really informed and really engaged in those positions. You know, talking with your board about how you want to run elections or applications. And again, these account information is really important. Making sure that you understand what you are required to do as an organization on your campus. So whether that's like registering as an official club on whatever platform they use, making sure that the incoming board understands how to reserve rooms, or you know, like if you're gonna bring food into a meeting or something, like how do you get reimbursed for that? Or, you know, these processes that you kind of like might just automatically think of, like your incoming board is just not going to know that unless they've been involved on the board before. So making sure that you kind of transfer that information. If you have any sort of like listserv management, so that's like people that receive a newsletter or whatever, just making sure that those platforms are shared. And then adhering to any safety trainings or requirements. So, you know, if you're doing a project that requires some sort of training through your university, just making sure you're aware of those things. On to the next bullet point of faculty advisors. So that's a requirement that we as HQ have for your chapters, as having a faculty advisor. So making sure that you at least have like annual contact with your faculty advisor, unless they're, you know, they're an active part of your organization. Just making sure you facilitate the introductions with the new incoming board. This is also a great time to have that check-in with your faculty advisor. If maybe they're not as hands-on as other faculty advisors, this is a good time to check in and see how they might be able to help you. They might know of like new opportunities for your chapter to get involved on campus. They might know of funding opportunities. It's just a really good resource to know and to utilize. So take this as an opportunity to connect with them. You should start managing your members towards the end of the school year. So this is helpful on for a wide range of reasons, but just making sure your rosters are up to date. It's really good to kind of know where you end the school year with your membership, kind of just taking stock of that. It also can kind of give you a boost on maybe like revisiting your recruitment process. If you're interested in like actively growing your chapter, this is good to like kind of know where you are and where you want to go. We talked about managing partnerships, so community contacts, corporate sponsorships, university contacts. That kind of covers a lot that we already talked about.
This is also something where, you know, even if there's another organization on campus that you've partnered with for events, or you, like if there are, you know, umbrella organizations that you're part of, those organizations might also be transitioning their leadership. So making sure that you reach out to figure out who the right contacts are instead of just assuming is also really helpful. Is the department chair that you work with the same? Is there a new president for this other club that you work with or that you've planned an event with? Yeah, just making sure that you take the time to think through all of that.
That's a really good point. And getting specific with project transition, so you also might transition the leadership of a project. So oftentimes we see projects kind of losing steam year to year just because maybe one year you have a leader of that project that's like really passionate about the project, and then maybe you don't have someone for the next school year. So again, I think this is a really good time of the school year to be thinking about these positions, especially projects that are like core to your chapter or like really important to the chapter. Encouraging project leaders to start having other people, like other active members, shadow them in that like leadership role. It's a really good opportunity to kind of get someone trained and understanding like what it requires to run that specific project. So other things that are kind of fall under this project proposals. So for example, through ESW HQ, we have the build date opportunities, we have project grant opportunities. So just thinking about how your chapter kind of interacts with these opportunities and thinking about how you can get your incoming leadership to understand what opportunities are available. I'll mention again, documentation, write everything down, every project meeting you have, take pictures, write things down, what progress did you make? Store that in your shared Google Drive or your shared platform. So in the future, next year when someone's like, I wonder what progress they made last year on this project, like someone can go through, they can look at these pictures, they can read minutes, they can really see the progress that you've made. And so they don't have to backtrack and redo steps. It's just a really good way to make sure you're kind of just moving forward with that kind of stuff.
There are also sorry, just to interrupt. There are some project related things that you might not think about that are really helpful to write down. So where materials are stored over the summer when you're not actively working on projects. If you're not, on campus over the summer, if you have like storage closets or, office space, like the door codes and the keys to that. Also, if your team has, anything that's like completed projects that you use. So we had like a solar kiosk that we used for like advertising versus like flyering. Some people have a similar thing that's like a solar smoothie cart or like a bicycle smoothie maker, bike blender. Making sure that you have like user manuals. Like I know we had to reach out to somebody who had graduated to be like, how do we connect this? Or like, because it wasn't kept all in one piece. So yeah, it's not just like, oh yeah, what was, the idea of the project, what is the like engineering documentation, but little things like, how you find this tool or that material, where things are kept on campus can be really helpful as well.
A good point. I'll also shout out the ESW project database. So if you are not familiar with that, that is a platform that we run through HQ. And it's just like a huge database of all the projects that are going on across the network of ESW chapters. So we encourage you at this time of year to make sure you're updating the project database with any progress, with any new information. And then also encourage the incoming project leadership to, also interact with this project database. So if you have an account on that that's shared across your chapter, making sure you share that account information is also really helpful. And again, like taking photos, writing down the timeline. If there is a specific timeline that the project had in mind at the beginning of this school year, you want to make sure that you kind of revisit that timeline at the end of the school year, revise it, to like say, okay, we actually made this amount of progress, so we need to revise our timeline and then sharing that with the incoming board is really helpful. And then on another HQ side, so we have good standing requirements that I assume everyone on this call is at least somewhat familiar with. So that's paying dues to ESW HQ, that's updating project database. My fellow CR members want to help me with other good standing requirements that I'm missing.
Yeah, the other key one that you're missing is just the checking calls with your CRC. So I think especially for the president role, one of the things I did was, write down expectations for the year. So it's not just things that you have to do as the incoming president, but, expectations of who might reach out to you or, things to look out for. Including having your CRC reach out about setting up calls and just, making sure that they know that that's something to expect and that that's something that they'll have to do.
And just to add on to that, something that like some of my predecessors did was like they started creating like a Google Drive folder with kind of like position reports. So like each person would fill out the position report for that year and they would describe kind of like what they did, who they contacted, what like important information that they needed. And like we built it up so it would be a reference point, a reference for like new board members in case, there was kind of a shift in leadership or, just like a bunch of new people were really ambitious about leading the chapter and stuff like that. So that's also something you guys could consider doing. Definitely not mandatory, but it's helpful.
Right. Like ideally, this is not something you have to start from scratch. But if you create this type of documentation this year, then the next year's leadership can edit versus start from scratch.
So I'm going to say the like main things to kind of think about as you're thinking about leadership transitions: documentation and planning early. And I'll also throw in like transparency. I feel like that kind of captures a lot of the documentation that we're talking about, just making sure everyone is on the same page. So creating a lot of redundancy on your leadership board or within your leadership position, just to make sure not everything is resting on your shoulders. So you kind of like share the knowledge with everyone involved. ESW is definitely like a group effort. So utilize your group and just work as a team for that. So that kind of concludes the content that we have created, but I just want to open it up for a discussion. If anyone has any concerns of your upcoming leadership transition or anything you would like to share with the others on the team, I think that's also really beneficial in these calls. So I'll just open it up. Anyone who would like to speak.
I wanted to start when you said transparency, it reminded me that, communication is always really helpful. And one of the things that we encountered during board transitioning was people who planned to go on study abroad, but still wanted to be involved and be on the leadership team for, one of the 2 semesters of the following year. And I know sometimes that's, there are policies in place. Sometimes it's more of a one-off, but making sure that, if people are thinking about stuff like that, that's something that's discussed early and shared. I know in our case, like 2 people ran for a position together and then were that position in the fall, and then only one of them was doing it in the spring. I think it was mentioned, like if you were RIT, you have engineering co-ops. So figuring out, what it looks like, it might be easier to still participate, especially post-COVID, if there are more ways to do virtual meetings and things like that. But yeah, just make sure that you're sort of upfront with expectations and plans with everyone before starting the new year. And I guess I also just have a question. I know it sounds like all of you have sort of your positions pretty set and maybe good policies in place, but I was wondering what time of year or if there is a set time of year that you tend to do your, board transitions. Is it before spring break? Is it after spring break? Is it closer to the end of the year? Just curious.
For us, it's usually about a month prior to the end of the semester. So that gives us about a week and a half to run elections. That includes nominations and secondary elections if needed. And then 2 to 3 weeks to actually have that transition period for our e-board.
Nice.
I don't think, we don't really have anything specific. It's just kind of, I think in general, leadership positions have just kind of lasted based on like maybe kind of seniority somewhat, but just once someone gets in a leadership position, I think it's just kind of lasts until they graduate and then someone else has it. I think that would basically just change if the program or the club grows more. That's
That
my
makes
opinion.
sense.
And do
Yeah.
you like that makes sense, having someone in the role until they graduate? Do you have any sort of either official or unofficial way of kind of bringing on the like next leader or something? Like, do you kind of, I know obviously you've got kind of like a president situation now. Yeah, if you want to speak to that, kind of encouraging the new, or like bringing on a new person into that role.
Yeah, I don't think there's really anything too particular. It's basically just, I mean, I'd say like in Riley and I's case, I mean, we just had the most, I guess, interest, or we were just like the most active probably in the club. It just kind of made sense for us, I guess. I don't know if you have anything else to say, Riley, about that.
Yeah, it was pretty much just that we were like the most active, and I think Ben kind of talked with us probably like November or something, kind of like see if we wanted to transition into his role.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's something that maybe in your time in these roles, kind of think about. It doesn't have to be something super official, but as soon as you identify a younger member that might be like a really good fit for a future leadership position, invite them to run an event with you, or go to a project meeting, or whatever it is that you kind of do in your role. Just encouraging like another person to shadow you. I think that's a really good opportunity for them and for you to kind of know that you're handing the leadership role off to someone who kind of knows the ins and outs of the position.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, like if there's anything that you wish you had had when prior to like your role, current role that you have now, like that might also be something that an incoming board member might want to have.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Any last thoughts from anyone on the call?
I guess I was wondering, EMU, are you anticipating a transition coming up? I know for RIT, I'll be graduating in May. So that's definitely something that's big on my mind.
I'm a sophomore and Riley's a junior, so I think we'll be good for a little
So
bit.
you got some wiggle room, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, hopefully we could, I don't know, at least I'd maybe like to try and get a little more structure put in place. That maybe like next year or something. We're currently, both Riley and I are working on a Shell Eco Marathon prototype car for that. And so we have 2 months till competition. So we're devoting as much time as we can till that. So maybe next year, start fresh in the fall and try and work on some things. But right now it's definitely pretty tight on time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you find that come next school year or whatever, that you're interested in maybe putting a little bit more structure onto the board, definitely not mandatory, but always a good thing to think about. But I would encourage you to chat with your CR, your traffic relations coordinator. They might be able to connect you with another chapter that is a similar size or a similar, just a similar organization that has a little bit of a structure, and you can either connect with them, or you can maybe kind of like get their documentation of their roles and responsibilities. And again, so you don't have to start off from scratch. Like, we've got a huge network of people that have done these things, so no need to like reinvent the wheel. You can just like modify the wheel, and just kind of like work from there. So definitely reach out if you are interested in putting a little bit more structure to that.
I'll also mention our constitution is on our website. So if you Google ESWRIT, that I would welcome you to poke around on our website, and all of our contact information is up there too. So if you ever want to continue this conversation outside of this time, we're more than open to do that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, if yeah, Sarah, were you about to
Oh, I was probably about to say the same thing you were gonna say, but
go for it?
always like to end on the note that if you do have questions that come up, or other thoughts and ideas, you can always share them in our global Slack, as well as ask questions to your CRC.
Yeah, thank you so much for spending the hour with us. We really appreciate your participation, and excited for y'all. As always, just reach out with any questions, and hopefully see you at the next event, which will be in March. It'll be a career panel with some professionals. Should be really interesting. You will get more information about that in the coming weeks. But yeah, thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you for coming,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of your week.